Hello, it's Colette from the Sacred Rose Temple. I wanted to speak to you about trauma and collective trauma and the fear that is around in the collective at the moment and how that might affect us all therapeutically and emotionally and physically. I am currently studying therapeutic mind-body studies under many fabulous teachers, and I had a lecture with a trauma somatic specialist called Peter Levine, who has been guiding me through trauma first aid training, and there's so much been coming up from that with me, with my own work with clients and within my own groups and my own journey in what's currently happening in the world. And I just wanted to share some musings. So the other day I posted about what the word trauma means. So trauma is a threat to survival. It's a threat to survival in the face of helplessness. So we often experience trauma when we face a scene or a scenario where we feel helpless. And all of us have different responses to helplessness. So you will notice that some people are really triggered into the fight response in helplessness. They will come into this automatic pilot where they rush into fight, to save, to rescue. And then you have people that come into the flight response who run away from it. And then you've got other responses such as freeze, the frozen response, that absolutely everything shuts down. And then we have something called the fawn response, which is a kind of more of a feminine response, a nurturing response to a situation. So there is no right or wrong in your bodily responses, and your response is completely a direct correlation of things that you've gone on what's gone on for you in the past, and maybe some traumas that you may have faced and how you dealt that, or how you've been nurtured and learned to deal with that in the past. But what's for sure is that our nervous system responds differently to all crisis and to all situations. We are currently in a situation, regardless what your standpoint is on the situation, that we are all in a state of lack of control. We don't have control of this. It's beyond our human control. And when that happens, there starts to be a whole range of response happens in the body, the physical body, for example. And then not just the physical body, but the emotional body. And those responses that I discussed with you before, the fight, the fright, the freeze, they are all a response to whatever situation's occurring. So for me, I have a very strong fight response. So I will be in this pandemic and I will be like, okay, get food, survive, get this, get that. It spurs me into an action. My son, for example, he has a very strong flight response. So he will run away from the situation, he will avoid it, he will distract himself, he will do other things to navigate his nervous system, to work with his nervous system. The reason I want to talk about the nervous system is I want you all to feel that you have some response going on. There is no one immune from the response. What is your response in this current crisis? Are you in fight mode? Are you in flight mode? Have you frozen? Are you numb? And they're really good things to ask yourself, because then you can see how you're dealing with it. We are all dealing with it in some way or another. And what this kind of time requires is management of ourselves emotionally and physically. We have many scenes and situations in past history where negating our emotional health was just never heard of. So we've had world wars, we've had troops in Afghanistan who suffered horrendous post-traumatic stress because it wasn't recognised that the human body was having a response during those horrific times. So this is why I wanted to record this. I wanted for people who watch this to know that you will be having some response in your body to this. What is that response? if we don't recognize the responses and what's actually going on for us, then this is when they can spiral out of control, or in, say, a year's time, they can really begin to impact us in ways that we didn't even correlate the two. So I always suggest to clients is there's some time in the day where you need to give yourself contemplation time, a time to sit and just tune in with yourself. So that can be first thing in the morning, it can be last thing in the evening, it can be the middle of the day. And it's a time that you want to just sit, take a few deep breaths, some stillness, and just ask yourself, honestly, how do I feel? How am I feeling? And for some of us, there will be a complete blank, a numbness, because we're not used to feeling. Some of us will get some indication physically how we feel. Maybe the body has been out of sync. Maybe there has been stomach ache, or palpitating heart, or shortness of breath. Maybe you've not even noticed that in the day, but when you sit still, you begin to notice, I've got a headache, my back's aching. And all of our physical symptoms hold some emotional weight within the body, and that's when we can start to do self-inquiry. So why is my back hurting? And those of you who have studied my yoga work, Chakra Evolution, I share that there is an emotional response to every physical response in the body. There are books by Louise Hay, for example, that will tell you what certain illnesses are linked to emotionally and what corresponding parts of the body show you about your emotional health. So backs are support networks, feeling support. Shoulders, if we get shoulder ache, are to do with feeling burdened. Headaches can be people who are in their thoughts a lot, in their ego a lot, in their mind a lot, going over things. Heart palpitations, to do with emotions and to do with relationships and connections. Stomach complaints due to like gut instincts and powerlessness. So every physical part of our body has a message for you. And do you give yourself enough time in the day to tune into those physical symptoms that you might not even recognize are going on? If we don't make time for those physical symptoms, they will only ever exuberate, they will get bigger, they will demand more of your attention. And this is when we start to see complaints of the body, chronic backaches, deep anxiety, things with the pelvis and the hips, and storing pain and emotion there, and not addressing what needs to be addressed. So the body will eventually heighten, and still people don't connect this to their emotional being. They will just see it as an ailment, so the body's gone wrong. So I wanted to share the importance of that with you all, is giving yourself physical time to connect to the body. It's very difficult for people to connect emotionally if they don't connect physically, because the body is the vessel that holds everything in. And we have been taught as a society not to respond to our emotions, to, stop crying, stop being angry, stop being this. And then we wonder why we've got a world who is sick and who is suffering with mental health issues and all the other complaints and suicide rates and all the tragic stuff we're seeing in society today. So connection to the self is really important, and knowing that all your bodies will be holding some resonance in what's happening in the current climate, and giving yourself the time to ask yourself, what is that? What is my response to this? What is my physical response? How am I feeling? Trauma, so remember what trauma is, a threat to survival in the face of helplessness, is a thing that really begins to trigger all our fears. So we're having a collective trauma at the moment. We are all facing helplessness. Whether you want to admit that or not is another conversation, because working with people who refuse to admit that this is having an impact on them is like arguing with a brick wall. And that's somewhere that you need to self-investigate. You need to self-inquire and say, this is having an impact on me. And if you're not prepared to do that, then we can't go any further with the deeper investigation into what this could actually do for you and open up for you. So I just want to highlight that wall that I have come across in some people who think that this is having no impact on them. And that really concerns me. It really worries me, because that will come back to them at some point to be healed. And normally, very normally, the physical body will bear the brunt of that. So admittance that we're all going through a traumatic experience. For me, that's been being able to sit with, how am I really truly feeling about this? And that's brought up many feelings: anger, hopelessness, anarchy, my rebels come out. Everything, every single part of my emotional self has showed itself through this pandemic. Even flight for me, which is not a common response. Yesterday I spent the whole day thinking, I just want to run away. I want to find a remote island, and I want to live where no one sees me, where there's no government. I know it doesn't exist, but that was where I was yesterday, and that allowed me to sit with my body, which felt completely drained and tired, and say, come on, what's going on here? What is it that I'm feeling out of control about? And running away is not going to help it. I have to sit with what is showing itself to me now. And I did that. And there was emotion yesterday that needed to release. So making sure we've got time to understand this traumatic experience that we're all in will save us in the future. It will really save us having to do some clean up work, maybe even post-traumatic stress that people will find themselves dealing with in a couple of months when this is kind of died down a little. So are you making those connections? Are you asking and inquiring yourself what this pandemic is actually making you feel emotionally, and not avoiding the feelings? That's the worst thing you can do, is to avoid. So I wanted to share, I've got some bullet points here of really important things that have come up in the last few weeks. When we're in survival mode, as we're all in now, whether we're taking it serious or not, whether we think it's an agenda, whether we think it's real, or, I mean, it is real, it's happening, of course it is, but whether the motives are behind that are irrelevant when we come to feel the fact that we're under threat. That's what's happening to us. We feel that we're under threat, A, from the virus, maybe B, from the government, maybe C, from the vaccine. So there's different levels of threat going on for us all at the moment. And in our primordial selves, in our instinctual self, when there's a threat, we enter into those responses I spoke to you about. And what we do is we localize the threat. We find the threat, we do something about it. So for example, if I had a kitchen fire, for me, I would instantly fight the fire. I would get a bucket of water, a fire extinguisher, whatever it was, and I would fight the fire. That would be my action and my response. I would localize the threat. I would do something about it. Maybe if you went into freeze response, you would be staring at the threat in total utter numbness, not knowing what to do with it. In flight, you might run away out of the kitchen to get away from the fire. So you will have an automatic way of localizing that threat. We know that the fire is the threat. The threat in this situation is different for all of us. So the threat for some of us is the pandemic itself, the virus. We're worried about the virus. The threat for some of us is the government and the statisticians, and some of the bodies that are working for the pharmaceutical industries that are giving us information about the vaccine. For some of us, it's Bill Gates. For some of us, it's the local health authority. For some of us, it's the WHO. Where is the threat coming from? And that's a really good question to ask yourself. Where is this threat coming from me? And the threat for me was, of course, the virus. I thought about the virus. I've seen and I know friends that have died and passed away from this virus. It was the government. Are they doing the right thing by us? Are they controlling us? The health authority, why do they want us to have a vaccine? And I felt threats from all over. What can I do to isolate that threat? How does that help me? So this is when we've started to see separation on Facebook and all friendships. And when we can't get the threat and take it by the neck and strangle it, we will inwardly take that threat and we will spit it out anywhere we want. We might be posting profusely on Facebook, all the agendas, all the situations, because it allows us in some way to attack the threat. We may completely be hiding. We might say, oh, I'm coming off Facebook, I'm not looking anymore, I'm not looking at it, because that's your flight response. And that's your response that's saying, if I don't see it, I can isolate the threat. Yeah, you get it? And so for me, I have always, when I felt the threat, felt some way that I could deal with it. And there's no right or wrong here. It's whatever that threat makes you feel. So, for example, the threat for me about the vaccination, I felt it. What does that mean? What's my fears? Where's my mind taking me? What is the real threat? Why am I threatened by it? And what can I do to isolate that? And it's always about bringing myself back in my power. I have control of this. I say whether the vaccine goes in my body or not. I am a sovereign being, and I can do all that self-regulation. There are times I'm not able to do that, and there are times that I have gone onto, say, Bill Gates' website or Instagram and wrote saying, I know what you're up to, you're not vaccinating me. And that's made me able to strangle and get hold of the threat. Yeah, and I'm not saying that's right, attacking outward, because it's giving my power away to him. I'm voicing something that's making me sound powerless. So the whole thing is to feel what the threat is, where your threat's coming from, and then to isolate that threat in an inward way and say, okay, this is the threat, this is the perpetrator, this is my worry, and how can I internalize that, feel it, emote it, and then bring myself into a regulation. And that's really important. So my mind can wonder, like anybody's, about what this potential vaccination, microchip, whatever you believe it to be, could do to me and violate my human rights. And my mind can wander with that. And so I try to come into a central place in my body and self-regulate. And how I do that is find the space inside my body where I center and anchor in. And that's a meditation that I will be sharing with you all that really helps to self-regulate the body. So once you've identified the self-regulation and you've been able to take it inward and say, okay, this is about me, what's going on, we start to deal with the outside world a little bit better. We won't be arguing with Janet on our Facebook page about her blinkered view on it, or we won't be, attacking Jeff for having a different opinion. We start to just share our truth and what we believe in, and we don't feel like we're being victimized or attacked from any other counter arguments or differing views. So yeah, the isolating the threat is really important. So isolate those threats. Where are they? Where is the danger, and how are you feeling that in your body? When you start to do that, when you start to isolate the threat and you realize what the threat is that you're worrying about or that you're working against, is you will realize there's a whole lot of fear that is embroiled in that. And so I described my fear of the vaccine and what that means for me, being someone that doesn't believe in vaccinations and that prefers a holistic approach to life and health and well-being. So it threatens not just the vaccine, it threatens my personal choice, and it threatens my whole way of being. My whole life is about, knowing that nature cures, and knowing that my life so far has been holistic and using herbs and all of those things, and to be violated. That's my biggest fear, is having my own individual rights violated. So I recognize the fear, and that's very, very, very important, and something that I'm going to discuss with you now. So fear is part of the path, and I did my weekly call with the women that I take in my Rose Alchemy group last night, and we talked about this. We talked about fear being very much part of our life path, no matter who you are, what you do, what you believe in. Fear dominates our lives. We all have fears every day about certain things. When we come to a certain understanding of the self, we begin to understand that fear is part of our everyday life. Many of us are in denial about that. You will ask anyone that's not done any deep self-inquiry, they will say, I'm not scared, I don't fear anything, and that's not true. When we are on this path, we're all looking, holistically, spiritually, whatever you want to call this, if you're on a path of God or religion, we're looking for love. We're looking to find the ultimate mystery, the love in this world, to become unified with that source once again, to live in complete love. And love is the polarity of fear. Fear takes away from us love completely. It suffocates love. And so when we're realizing that a fear is coming in, we have to understand that that fear is coming up, not to run away from it, not to fight it, not to freeze, not to mother it, but to face it. And what do we mean when we say face fear? We mean feel it. Feel it, what you're scared of. Try to be truthful to yourself. This is a path of truth that we're all trying to get on. We're trying to be truthful to ourselves. What am I scared of? And then you'll start to get the answer in the body, in the feeling mode. And when you're dealing with the feelings, you get something called courage, and you get courage to face the fear. So I remember many years ago, someone saying to me in my family, you don't face fear all the time. It's not about facing fear. You've got to keep yourself safe. And that's a misunderstanding of fear, because that's danger. Danger and fear are completely different. When we're in danger, we have a real threat. The kitchen fire is a real threat. The tornado coming into the village is a real threat. You're in danger. There's danger. But a fear is when the mind begins to say, oh, there's a vaccine, you could die. Oh, there's a vaccine, you're going to lose your free will. It's not happening at this moment. It's a possibility. But my mind in my fear is going to run away with that, run amok. If I face the fear, and this is what I've done with this whole situation, is I am scared of being forced to have the vaccination. That's my biggest fear. And so I go and face that, and I feel that. And what does that bring up for me? Helplessness, powerlessness, anger, grief, sadness, total injustice. It brings up this whole range of feelings that I have to deal with. I must deal with, because I'll end up dealing with them if I don't do that now. And so I allow this range of emotion to move through me. And then I come into what I call self-regulation. I anchor in the self. And I say, okay, I'm here in this present moment. And being in present moment is so difficult, because we're already looking back at the past and we're looking at the future. So to be here in this moment is very difficult for many of us. And so in this moment, that is not happening to me. I am not in this moment being forced to have that vaccination. That's my fear. And I know that my fear will run away with it. What am I going to do when I'm being asked to face that fear? And once I've emoted it, I can then answer those questions for myself. Well, I can refuse. And then my mind comes up with all different scenarios. So I have to keep facing those fears. So what does that fear show me? What does that fear show me? And so this is the inner work. This is the self-inquiry. This is the feeling. This is the healing. This is the emotion. This is the inward reflection that we all need to be doing. And I don't just sit in a room all day feeling what needs to be felt. I am at the stage in my journey where I can be making the tea and feeling the emotions that are coming through doing my work, and feeling the emotions that are coming through hoovering the living room, and feeling what needs to be addressed. It's not sat in meditation like a Buddha, you know, channeling the feelings. It should become very organic for us, and it does when we start to create and leave time for ourselves. So I say to anyone that's starting out in this kind of feeling introspective life, to enable themselves time to begin with. Take an hour out in the morning, half an hour, and just go into, how do I feel? What am I scared of? What is running through me today that needs addressing? And in that way, we start to flex a muscle of feeling and introspection, and then that becomes easier to do as we're going about normal life. So it's really good to start there. So regulating the fear. I want to share a practice with you, but before I do that, I just had a few more things to discuss. So when we're talking about the fear, and then some of us are denying that there's a fear, well, it's obvious that there are many concerns going on in the collective, and this is when I want to talk about collective trauma. In our world, whether it's directly affected you or not, people have died. And I have lost friends from this virus. I have known friends whose parents or grandparents or child has died from this virus. So being a compassionate being means that I am feeling the impact of people losing loved ones, even if that's not been directly my own family or myself. I want to connect to those people who have lost loved ones in this. That's being a compassionate human being. That's being connected. That's being beyond the ego and the self, saying this has impacted families, and there is a collection of grief on this family. And it's not just this pandemic, is it? It's cancers that take loved ones, slavery, trafficking, starvation, all of that goes on in the world. And to feel that you're not affected by it in some way is a complete disconnection of yourself from the collection. So feeling that, and the reason I'm giving more focus on the pandemic is because this is something that for once in our lives we are all sharing together. We can ignore slavery, we can ignore child trafficking, we can ignore children dying of starvation, we can ignore sexual abuse because it's not touching us in our life. So we'll just put that in one box over in the corner because that is the monster that we all don't want to face, and we don't have to because it's not happening to us. And that's what's happened in this world. We've come completely disconnected. We've said, well, it didn't happen to us, so that's not gonna, I'm not gonna think about that. It's too horrible to think about. It's a really selfish way of living, and no wonder the world's in the state that we live in. But I want to focus on this because I know that this is a way in with people to get them to connect to the collective, because people are dying. I could die. You could die from this virus. No one is immune from it. So the threat is to all of us. We're all in this together. This will affect us in losing the life that we had before, all of us, and not living the same life we had before. And, you know, I flippantly said, well, I'm a bit of a hermit. I live in rural France and I write all day in my house and I self-grow food, and this is not. And that's a bit of an ego thing. I caught myself out saying that. I'm not that affected. Of course it affects me. I go to the shop and there are queues of people with masks on. There are divisions between us. I went to the city for the first time in nearly 3 months and there were military about. Of course this is impacting me, even though my life is not very, you know, mainstream. It's still impacting me. So my life before is different to it is now. Of course it is. I can't just get in the car and drive to further than 100 kilometers at the moment. I can't go to a gathering. I can't go to my favorite local cafe and have coffee with other, you know, expats here in France. I just can't do those things. So my life is being affected and I want to honor the ways in which it's being affected so I don't bypass them. We get identification from workplaces, and this doesn't affect me because I work on my own, in my own home. I am aware that there are those of you that go to a workplace and are part of a team and have an identification within that team. So there are teachers, I used to be a school teacher, that are no longer going to their workplace every day and meeting the other teachers and working with the children. So who are they? Who do they become at home without their role, without their title? And people are losing a loss of identification. And as much as some of us on this path might say, well, that's a good thing, we start to connect to ourselves, there's still feeling and trauma and upset in that loss of identification, because whether we like it or not, identification within our work allows us to be in community and into team. And that's very, very important. Peter Levine, my teacher, said this morning, it shouldn't be called social distancing. That's very, very detrimental to our need for communication and connection and touch with people. It should be called physical distancing, just distancing ourselves physically with our body, but not distancing ourselves emotionally or with our voices, because this is a time that community is needed and we can't meet as community as we did before. We have to find new ways to meet as community, to enter into, you know, there's a lot of online groups going on and online activities, and that is better than the word isolation, because isolation has always been a punishment, really, unless it's for religious and spiritual purposes. So this is a forced isolation. Let's not forget, it's not an isolation that I might do, say, going on to a Vipassana, a silent pilgrimage, or I have taken pilgrimages of complete isolation from other people, but to do something for my inner self. It wasn't forced upon me. Community is suffering in that the clubs and the societies, and there are so many great societies and clubs that have been formed together to be able to work with children and keep our kids entertained, and communities for older people who are on their own. All of that type of community is currently missing, and that's a tragedy for those people who rely on community to keep in contact with others and feel a sense of purpose. So that's also been lost for many of us. One question that came up for me and my son the other day, and he was talking about it, is our future. Our future is not known. I personally came to France to open up this retreat centre, and that has been, sabotaged now, and I don't know what the future of this space is going to be at the minute. I don't know what the future of this space will be anymore, because nothing's certain at the moment. We're still all in the wings of uncertainty. So trying to, all of us, work out what that future holds is an impossible thought. So we have to stay grounded and rooted in the now. what we do need is the courage to face all these things that are being lost from our past, from the recent past, so in life as we know it. And we get to choose, we get to face fear. When we face our fear, when we know what our fear is and we face it, we begin to develop such courage. I have shared my journey with you, and to make those changes that I needed to change took me into facing the fears. What if I don't see my son? What if my business fails? What if life in that other country isn't good like that? What if? They were all fears, and I had to face them. And every time I faced a fear, I gathered new courage, new courage, a new power within myself. And every time I take myself out of the box of comfort and walk and face my fearing feelings and do not let those feelings stop me, I venture on new courage ground. I find a new courage, and that builds my character. So we all know that even in dire situations and crisis, that we can make a choice. We either live in the fear, choose to live the fear and live in it, or ignore it until it comes for you. Or we face our fears and we find the courage to do something about the fear that we're living in, to do something about it. And we can't often control situations. So the situation we're in now, we have no control over, but we can control how we deal with it and how we face it and how we manage ourselves during it. So this is an important message for me to give, and I know it's been a bit long-winded, but I really hope that it will help some of you. I will be recording a meditation, a centering meditation for those of you that are finding it hard to self-regulate and self-center at the moment. And it's the regulation that I do when I feel myself coming into fear, anxiety, overthought in the head, or in a physical reaction in my body. I come into a self-regulatory exercise. So I'll share that with you over the next coming days. But I just want to say, let us all begin to manage how we feel and know what our responses are and know what our feelings are and what our fears are. And we can manage a much more cohesive relationships with people out there. It would just make it much more understanding, empathetic, compassionate, and easier. And that's how I navigate any kind of personal attacks or seeing people struggling out there. I know underneath it all is just a personal struggle inside that maybe they're not dealing with, or I kind of see whether they're in freeze or flight or fight, and it's very easy to identify those that are in freeze and non-acknowledgement, and that's their right not to want to go into that, and also those that are fighting for their own survival. So knowing yourself is the change that this world needs, and this is not healable by any outside source or event or mystical being or second coming. The change in our world is down to us, and it is screaming at us to change. So asking always, how do I need to change? What am I ignoring? What am I not feeling? Is part of the evolution that's needed on this planet right now. So I'm sending much love to you all in this very difficult time, and hoping that this comes as some help. Love to you all, and I will speak to you soon.